Hi, this is Brian Tarrant with Significance Magazine, and I'm reporting today from RSS Conference in Belfast. And I'm here with Darren Daly and Martin van Schmeerden. Hello both.
Hello.
Hello.
And we're here today to talk about Stats Twitter. That's hashtag Stats Twitter. So you gave a talk this morning, Tuesday, at conference. What was it about? What were you discussing?
Yeah, so I think that we both use Twitter quite a lot to discuss statistics, to discuss research. And part of the goal of the session was just to kind of discuss how to get people to engage, what are the kind of pros for them in terms of their career as a statistician, what can statisticians contribute to kind of wider society by participating on social media, and then also acknowledging the kind of risks that people face when they engage in social media and how those can be disproportionately distributed among statisticians who choose to engage.
So are you veterans of Twitter, or has it been a recent discovery for you? What's your history with?
So I joined in, I want to say 2010, so I've been there for a long time, just kind of piddling along and slowly kind of picking up followers, but I've always been very interested in it. I was very interested in science blogging when I got my first job in Leeds as a lecturer, and trying to use blogs to write about scientific papers and explain the statistics behind them. So very much from a statistics communication standpoint. And Twitter was a very natural complement to that. You'd write something in the blog, and then you could go to Twitter and you could kind of tweet and advertise essentially and share what you had written. But then over time, and I'd say really in the past 3 years, you see an influx, I think, of a lot of statisticians and scientists more broadly joining Twitter, getting involved. And so things have really taken off, not just in terms of a promotional tool, but now I think it's very much a conversational tool, connecting people. So I think I've been on there for a long time.
Yeah, for me, it's I'm probably part of that influx 3 years ago. I started approximately 3 years ago because of people like Darren. We had a lot of interesting things to say, and the great thing about Stats Twitter, in my opinion, is that it's very inclusive. So I felt quite at home, even although I'm an early career researcher, and I started participating, and it went on from there. Yeah.
So we should explain Stats Twitter, I think, for listeners, in case they're not on social media. I know many are, but so this would be any conversation tagged with the hashtag Stats Twitter, right?
Yeah, so I think it's a broader idea. So people do use that particular hashtag, but to be honest with you, not that often.
Right, okay.
So it's a more of an amorphous kind of a thing. It is the loosely defined, kind of community of people, and not just statisticians, but people who use statistics. And so Stats Twitter kind of gets a lot of overlap with medical education, with the economists, with the epidemiologists, other kind of groups that are on Twitter quite a lot, and kind of operating in a similar way. This kind of non-hierarchical, non-organized, very kind of fluid conversations among experts. And Stats Twitter is just kind of one way to kind of put a name to it. Mm-hmm. But people do use the hashtag, and I do search it from time to time to see what conversations are happening. It is useful in that way.
So I share your history with Twitter, sort of mirrors a bit of my own, Darren. When I first started using it, I don't know if it was around 2010, but I was on a different magazine, and we were simply using it to promote articles. And seeing that change over time, for it to become more of a conversation platform, a question and answer platform, a request for help platform. People can use it in all kinds of different ways. So what was the sort of key message you were trying to get across to people today about how to incorporate Twitter into their daily lives or their professional lives?
Yeah, I think there's kind of a double-edged thing where we want to promote people to get involved and to show them that lots of other people there, we're having discussions, we're making collaborations, we're learning from each other, there is benefit. But we also have to acknowledge the fact that social media participation for some people can lead to all kinds of problems, getting kind of abusive messages, kind of getting people being argumentative and wasting their time and things like that. So it doesn't come without risks. And so we'd like to kind of increase the number of people who aren't just lurking on Twitter, although they're always, of course, very welcome, but people who are also, actively conversing and whatnot. But again, you can't really do that if people are going to, invite a hard time from strangers when they do it. So it's just trying to kind of raise awareness of some of these issues in some respects. So we're just trying to be welcoming. and let people know that we're, that those of us who are there, lots of us are very cognizant of these things, and that we want to make sure that it's a nice place for everyone to come and chip in their 2 cents. And sometimes you're wrong, and sometimes you're right, and nothing wrong with that. Just to kind of get that across, I guess.
And you did talk about academic critique on Twitter in your sessions today, right?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And what's sort of the fuzzy area around the rules of this? Because I know that there's a kind of formal process you would normally go for to critique a published article. Twitter is a bit of a free-for-all. So what are the tensions that exist there when you're talking about published work in that forum, especially when you're limited to so few characters, and getting a subtle point across might not be as easy as making a kind of a bit more of a bullish point, maybe.
Yeah, no, fair enough. So
point.
the one example that we gave is actually something Martin and I were both involved in, and it was a paper that used a particular method. We didn't think that that was the appropriate use for that particular statistical model. Independently, myself, Martin, and another statistician named Frank Harrell had written blog posts, and then we kind of promoted those on Twitter. We saw each other's blog posts. We decided to get together and write a letter to the editor. And that letter was published, and then other people went on to follow up on our critique and some other data, and they were able to essentially confirm that our concerns about the first paper, not that it was done in any kind of fraudulent way, it's just not the choices we would make. They were able to confirm that. But the frustration, I think, with the letters to the editor is that they often don't get published. They take a long time to appear, and they're not really a very corrective mechanism, to be fair. And so the point you're picking up on, I think, is very true on Twitter. There are lots of very strong opinions in both ways. I'm of the mindset that if you publish something, it has the word public in it, and that once you have made it public, that you are open for public critique. And I don't see talking about papers on Twitter as anything different than if I do a journal club at the hospital or at the university. If we walk into a room together with 8 strangers and we have a paper in hand and we want to discuss it, nobody would question us for that. Doing it online is all out in the open. Anyone can see the discussion. Anybody can rebut if they want to. And every once in a while you get these people like, it's not fair, they're not on Twitter to defend themselves. Well, they're not in the hospital, the break room where we're talking about a paper. They're not in the auditorium or whatever either. So I don't really take those arguments very seriously myself.
And I suppose as well, as long as you're keeping it professional in terms of, it not being ad hominem attacks.
Sure.
So you're critiquing the work rather than the individual behind the work. It's, that's how the normal course of academic debate should run.
I think so, but you do find too some disagreements there. So I think where I would, I've certainly crossed the line into ad hominem attacks in some respect based on some people's definition of what that would be. So questioning people's motives, for example, some people would call that an ad hominem attack. And so we've critiqued papers before, and I've critiqued papers, and I think what really sometimes gets my ire up a little bit, is that the way to put that? Something that really frustrates me is to see scientists using science and statistics essentially to sell things that we are pretty sure don't actually benefit people. And again, once you call into question people's then motivations, I think you start to get some more pushback too. It's not fair for you to critique this aspect of what we're doing. And I don't buy that personally, but it's an opinion.
Okay. Martin, your experience, you said you're an early career researcher.
Correct.
How have you approached Twitter, and how has it kind of integrated with your professional life and helping you, find contacts, find collaborators, that sort of thing?
Right. So yeah, I started about 3 years ago when I ended my PhD and started as a postdoc researcher. It's a part of my daily work, so to say. When I do it, that depends. Sometimes it's in the train, and sometimes it's not taken over my entire work. I still write papers and that kind of stuff. But I found a lot of collaborators actually via Twitter. Darren is one, and I also have some other people I've been invited to talks and that kind of stuff. So it has been very important actually to my start of my early career. That said, we already talked about that during the session too. There's of course the time drain problem, and that's something you have to balance. And I think I'm getting better at it, but it's
time drain being spending too much time scrolling through your timeline. So this was something that I was afflicted by when I first got onto Twitter in my previous job, and I would spend a good 2 hours in the morning just scrolling through, trying to find anything interesting that people had talked about. Do you have tips on how to a healthy Twitter life balance, or Twitter work balance, or is it just limiting it to a certain period of the day? How do you go about it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't do as good of a job as I should. I do tend to start my day looking through Twitter. I know that when I write something, one of the things that can sidetrack me on a day is if I write something kind of for public consumption, I know on those days to be extra disciplined and to put Twitter away. Because watching the responses to what you've done is very time consuming and pointless. It's going to be there. You'll get your pats on the back and you'll get your criticisms the next day, but it can really derail the rest of your workday. I do use filters. I try to use filters pretty liberally, and even then I still can't resist commenting on political issues, or sometimes I want to say things about economics, which I'm certainly not an expert in, but I do try to kind of tamp that stuff down. But there is no easy solution. But I guess I take some solace in the fact that I think that the pros ultimately justify a bit of extra wasted time in the middle of the day.
And Martin, do you have any advice on that front?
Well, one of the approaches I take is I'm trying to accept the fact that I'm missing out on certain things, and I try to avoid, and I do avoid, looking at Twitter during my workday, most of it. So these are very simple approaches. Another simple approach is if you have limited time on a particular day, you can make a so-called Twitter list with a limited number of people, so you really get the highlights of that limited number of people. It might be people that are retweeting also of other people, so you get a sort of the highlights of it. So that's how I manage. I cannot always follow what all the 750 people that I follow or something are saying, but I can follow that 100 people more easily. So that's how I try to balance.
And obviously social media is much broader than just Twitter. Did you touch on any of the other sort of channels that people could explore in the talk today? Yeah,
so we raised like a number of things and how things have really kind of taken off. So the blogging is kind of where things really started, I think, with Internet 2.0, and all of a sudden we could put things online and share it quickly, and it didn't take ages to do and all the rest of it. And so blogging I still think is a really important thing. And with particularly for like statisticians online, some of the blogs in particular, Deborah Mayo's and Andrew Gelman's, their comment sections are really rich sources of information and debate. And you have threads there. You'll have 200 comments sometimes, and you scroll through and you recognize half the names, and you're kind of amazed at how they were able to get this kind of engagement. There's another really good one that was started by Frank Harrell recently, which is a Disqus-based message board called datamethods.org. And in a very short period of time, a lot of people involved in medical research, public health research, statisticians, clinicians, investigators, epidemiologists, have all really been contributing to that quite a lot and engaging. And we're kind of compiling like a colleague of ours. I call him a colleague. I've never met him in real life. Andrew Althouse, for example, has a thread on there about collecting references for when you want to rebut a particular statistical flaw in a paper that you might review that we see over and over again. This kind of useful thing happening. You're also seeing one thing with Twitter, and something that Martin really illustrated nicely, was it's become so much better at multimedia. So now you can embed a short video, obviously pictures and things like that. So there's there's so much more flexibility in communicating. There are the question and answer sites like Stack Overflow and Cross Validated, where people can go ask their questions, do a good job of asking a good question, and you'll get experts commenting, discussing, and everything else. Podcasts have really kind of taken off, and there's a couple of notable ones in terms of statistics and kind of science reform. Was there anything else that I'd picked up on? I think that was most of it. One other thing was that I've done some work with a patient advocacy group around melanoma, and they use Facebook. I don't use Facebook for really anything. They use Facebook very effectively for this patient community. And so then they can ask questions, and if it's something I can actually help with, then I can answer. So you just see it. You see it everywhere.
Excellent. I wonder if we'll see the same sort of generational trends with statistics social media as we do with sort of more general social media, where obviously younger people are not going on Twitter and Facebook now. They're sort of exploring Instagram stories and Snapchat or I think Snapchat might well be out of fashion now.
All right.
It happens that quickly. So it'd be interesting to see how it develops in the future. But in the meantime, if people are already on social media or they want to start getting into social media, do you have websites, resources, or anything that they could look at to get up to speed quickly on who to follow and things like that?
Well, I think the first step is just to get on Twitter, and it's so nice for searching. So if you were to search the Stats Twitter hashtag, you'd come up with a number of people right off the bat. And I think most people are quite happy to point you in whatever directions. And I think there's probably about 100 people at this point who have written blog posts about the use of social media for scientists, and here's where you get started. So actually getting on Twitter, like Twitter is so good at in terms of content discovery, you get on there, you ask the question, you'll find out pretty quickly exactly what people think.
But obviously first things first would be to follow you, Darren, at
Stats Epi.
Stats Epi, and Martin?
At Martin V. Smeeden. That's it.
Excellent. Well, hopefully you'll get a few new followers
out
of chatting to us today, but thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yeah, thank you very much, Brian. That was great.
Thank you.